Part of this configuring security domains, the important piece is actually the authentication module, the JBoss authentication module. Let's take a look at how to configure a security domain here. For an example, what are the important tags in XML or the configuration file? Let's take a look at defining a database security realm here. I'm looking at a configuration file. Part of the coming up lab, you'll configure the security domain. So part of the security domain, you have a name, JB Travel, as you can see. And within that security domain tag, you have an authentication tag. So you can have an authentication authorization tag. Here's an authentication tag. Part of the authentication tag, it has a login module and login module code database. So this code, this database is actually a part of an alias. The alias we looked at here, for example, the database alias we can use, which is actually identify the full qualified class name. So make it easier in EAP 6 when you're doing the configuration. And then based on the JBoss login module here in this database, you have this required module options tag. So here part of the module options tag, the first attribute or name that attribute that you require with the name attribute here, DS JNDI name, which is data source JNDI name. And we actually already have configured part of unit 6 a JB travel data source. So here's the Java column JBoss JB travel data source. So that's actually talking to the database itself. So anything within the Java EE application server environment that want to talk to a database, they actually go through the data source itself. So that's what the security domain also trying to use the data source itself. Then you have the other module option attribute principals query. So that's actually trying to verify the username, user ID, and password here. So you have a SQL for that, where username equal to whatever the user ID that typically the user will type in whenever it's prompting for the authentication. So if somebody is authenticated by verifying the user credential, that doesn't mean they're allowed to access the protected resource. That's what the roles come into play in Java EE. So roles-based authorization. So you have the roles query that actually allows you to identify you don't actually have a roles created. So, but you once you configure that properly for the roles column available, then you actually can able to make sure whether that user belongs to that role. You actually specify that query itself. So once you configure that, it actually allows you to properly authenticate and authorize the user so they can able to access the protected resource. So let's take a look at how do you protect these resources. Here's I have an example.wo application, as you can see here. Part of the example.wo application, we have a index.jsp, a webin folder. Within the webin folder, as you probably know, we have these two deployment descriptor files, web.xml and JBoss web.xml, which is the JBoss specific one. So the web.xml part of the Java EE standard. Across any application server, you will find it. Part of the WO package, you will find this web.xml. And typically in real world, you also find the vendor specific XML file, or the JBoss-web.xml in this case. Let's take a look at these files. So in the web.xml, as you can notice here, we have the security constraint tag, identify the web resource collection, a collection of resource that you're trying to protect. The important tag here is the URL pattern. / mean anything part of the application. So your host port /example / so anything part of that example application. Authorization constraint, who can able to authorize to access that. Here we just put the wildcard here, that means any role-based user. So typically you need to declare the role. So here's a security role tag. Outside of this security constraint tag, you see a security role tag where you can declare or define your roles that makes sense for your application. For example, if you have a online bank application like customer, teller, manager, you have to declare those roles, and using those roles you will actually start creating the security constraint, specify the web resource collection of resources when it comes to web-based application, not just an individual component, because we have a lot of static resources like the image, HTML templates and all that. And then authorization constraint, who is authorized to access that particular URL pattern. Then we also have a login config tag here, part of the standard, the login config tag. We identify how to actually capture the authentication credential. Here in this case, basic. So it's a 401 authorization that actually the browser will pop up a dialog box for username and password. And then here's what we actually, how you associate this particular application to use a security domain within JBoss. So the rel name JB Travel, which actually get resolved in here, JBoss web.xml. The security domain tag, so the JBoss web.xml, the security domain tag, you specify the JB Travel here. Now this JB Travel here, you notice that there's a prefix here, Java colon JAS. Let me just undo that here. Java colon JAS. So Java colon JAS, that's actually a JNDR prefix. So this is typically the traditional way in JBoss. Each of these security domains get registered in the JNDI namespace, the naming system, under Java colon JAS subcontext. So when it comes to the security domain itself, here's the security domain name. Automatically it takes that name and registers in the JNDI tree. So that's why part of your application we must specify the full qualified JNDI name, so you can able to identify or choose the specific security domain. So this is part of your application itself, part of the web XML, JBoss web XML you configure. So once you deploy the application, it will be protected by that security domain, which is in our case is the database security domain. So that is the database security domain. So part of the course material, you will go through this similar tag set here for security domain for the data source. They call it MyDB domain, login module database, and you will get to answer some of the verbal quiz. Now, if you have something similar to this type of security domain, how do you actually look at it in the CLI? You can be able to edit through CLI or the management console. Take a look at that management console. Here the security domain, JB Travel. So under the profiles, security domains, JB Travel, you click on view here, you notice that you have the authentication section. Part of the authentication system, we have the database required and the module options for the database, as you can notice here, DS JNDI name, data source JNDI name, principal queries, roles query, you specify that. Now you can able to look at it as using the CLI also, using CLI profile HA subsystem security domain JB Travel, and then colon operation read resource recursively true, and you can able to see that it actually listing this authentication module, part of the login modules, module options, Java colon JBoss JB Travel data source, the principal queries and rows queries. You can see those. So that concludes the database security domain.